Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm calling this meeting of the Lawrence Alliance for Education, the June meeting, to order. And so at this time we will stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment? Okay, at this time, I'm going to put the minutes from the May 9th, May 16th, and May 21st meetings before the board. Does anyone have any issues with any of those minutes that they want to raise? So at this time, I would accept a motion to adopt the minutes from these three meetings. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. At this time, we're going to move into executive session to discuss a pending collective bargaining agreement. Could I get a motion to move into executive session?
So moved.
Could I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. At this time, we are...
Roll call.
Oh, we got a roll call. Okay. Yep.
I'm getting the other ones too. Okay. Mayor Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. Sanders? Yes. Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Ms. Mariano?
Yes.
Ms. Castillo?
Yes.
And Mr. Conley?
Yes. Okay, at this time, we are going to move into executive session to discuss the collective bargaining agreement. We have a conference room just through the doors here where I would ask board members to move so we can discuss the collective bargaining agreement.
Where are we going?
Just right around the corner here. We have voted to leave executive session. I will just say that we held the executive session to discuss a tentative agreement on a collective bargaining agreement between the Lawrence Administrators Association and Lawrence Public Schools. We had a good discussion on the terms of this contract and specifically the amounts and funding pieces. I did want to note that I believe the president of the LAA is here, and I would ask if she would be willing to come to the podium. We would greatly appreciate the opportunity to hear from her. If you wouldn't mind stating your name for the record and your title, that would be great.
Jean Zambruski. I'm a president of the Lawrence Administrators Association. I'm also an assistant principal at the South Lawrence East Elementary School.
Ms. Zambruski, thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for coming up to testify, and thank you for your service to Lawrence Public Schools. We appreciate that on all fronts. I was wondering if you wanted to make any general comments about this agreement. I
really want to thank you on behalf of the Lawrence Administrators Association, and thank you for the opportunity excuse me, to continue the work that we've started here in the last few years. We're a very committed group, and we're here to work with you and all of you just to keep things going. So again, I thank you for your support.
We appreciate that. I'm going to just ask a couple of questions that may seem silly just for the record, but I just want to ask you, you are in agreement as the leader of the LAA that you are supportive of this agreement that's been bargained and presented to us in executive session?
Yes.
And your members are supportive, and as much as you represent them as their leader, you can say that they are in support?
Absolutely. Yep. It was a unanimous vote to approve.
Great. And any other members want to ask Ms. Zambruski a question? Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So at this time, I will accept a motion to, you want to give me the to ratify the contract between the Lawrence Administrators Association and Lawrence Public Schools. Can I get that motion?
Sure. So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and I know we have to read a roll call on this.
Okay, so, Mayor Rivera,
Yes.
Ms. Andrews,
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez,
Yes.
Ms. Mariano,
Yes.
Ms. Custodia Laura,
Yes.
and Mr. Conley.
Yes.
Passes.
Okay, so by a vote of 6-0, we've approved the contract between LAA and LPS, and we thank both parties for all their hard work in reaching this agreement, and are very happy to see the great spirit of collaboration between LPS and the collective bargaining units within LPS, and how everybody, they don't always necessarily agree, but are always seem to be working hard to get on the same page, and we appreciate that. So at this point, I'm going to move to number 5 very quickly on the agenda, which is the report of the chair, and I think most of the things I want to report on are in the agenda already. I want to turn it over to Dr. Rodriguez quickly, because we did receive notice around sort of the status of the turnaround plan. Dr. Rodriguez, I was wondering if you could just give a quick, overview of sort of the process relative to the
Sure.
turnaround plan.
Sure. So turnaround plans are 3 years by law, and so we are coming to the end of the second 3-year turnaround plan for Lawrence Public Schools. Now, our law allows for the current turnaround plan upon its expiration will remain in place as the plan for the district until a new one is created. We should have received letters, I think everyone on the board, in the last couple of weeks, letting us know that the turnaround plan was expiring, but that the current plan will remain in effect until a new one is created. And we have a new superintendent coming on board, and so I think, this board will decide on the timeline of that, but, I guess my own perspective would be that we would obviously work with the new superintendent to help create the new turnaround plan that will guide the district. But until that new plan's in place, we are operating under the current one, even though it technically has expired.
Okay. I think we're going to pick this topic up a little bit when we discuss the meeting agreement with the Lawrence School Committee, but just thank you, Dr. Rodriguez, and just wanted to make sure that we've got this on the record and all the board members understand. Current turnaround plan is about to expire, but will then remain in effect until a new turnaround plan is finished, and then would come before this board to be approved to, I believe, then be submitted to the DESE commissioner. I know some folks here, maybe all have read the current turnaround plan that we're under, but this is no small undertaking for the next superintendent. And so it's something that I think as a board, we're going to have to be involved in and monitor closely as well.
So,
Ms. Anderson?
John, just a question. Is there like a template for a process around either creating a new turnaround plan or modifying and renewing the existing one? Or is that something that's just entirely up to our discretion about how we want to do that and who participates in that?
Dr.
Rodriguez is the expert on turnaround. I don't know if he wants to be referred to that way, but I know he's done a lot of work on it.
I can speak a little bit about it, but so first of all, turnaround plans, there are statutory requirements that go into creation of the turnaround plans, and typically those requirements include timeline, and it's pretty tight, where you have 30 days to complete one portion, then 45 days to review, and 30. So there is a timeline, and then there are also typically different groups that are identified by law that participate. So for example, there's something called the local stakeholder group that in the law, it says the different types of stakeholders that participate in creating ideas and generating ideas for the turnaround plan. So that's the process that we followed, you know, here
At the
in Lawrence.
beginning.
There is, however, just to be clear, at the end of the day, these are plans that, the turnaround plan is the commissioner with the receivers. So, you know, just want to be clear about that, that it's the commissioner ultimately, you know, who, it's his plan with the receivers for the district. You know, I think that we can look at the process that's laid out in law, and like all processes that we've used to this point with superintendent feedback and so forth, we could always make recommendations around steps, you know, probably that we'd want to follow, as long as, again, we're following what's actually written for into the law. So it might be a good topic for us to, as the chair said, to pick up both from the legal perspective to make sure we understand what's in the law, and then, you know, decide how we want to go about sort of creating our own process.
Okay, so are we going to discuss that tonight? Because and do we, just as a point of procedure, do we need to vote to extend the current turnaround plan while we give ourselves time to create a new one, or decide if we want to do that, or?
I think based on communication we've received from DESI that the plan has been via the commissioner extended.
Extended
Doesn't-
indefinitely.
Until the new plan is completed.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Is that fair characterization?
That's correct.
Mr. Chair,
Yep.
so I think the way I see it, I think in my head, I'm seeing it play out, is that the new superintendent gets in, and we charge her with what we want to be part of the turnaround process, and she'll get her direction. It's gonna be her first foray into having 4 or 5 bosses. So she's gonna get like, hey, this is what worked in the last turnaround plan, things we thought should be in it. Then they'll go to the legislation, and then a plan will be produced, and then we'll all be participating through the creation of that plan, like the meeting of it, like the what gets put into it. The process of it will be brought to us, and then tweak it, and then we'll go out and make it happen and create a plan after that. Because the first one, basically, given the fact that the receiver and the superintendent was one person, all that kind of happened
Yeah.
in one fell swoop. But now I think there's got to be like this interaction with us and the superintendent, and then us coming up with the plan to create the plan, and then going out and doing it.
Okay, so when is Cynthia Paris starting?
So we will pick that up in,
Okay, sorry,
Two-
point 7.
two items
gotcha.
there.
All right. Because I guess what I would say about this is that I would suggest that, and I'm not saying that the current and renewed turnaround plan is a bad one, but I think 6 years into it, it's a good idea to revisit it
Yeah.
and to have some community process as outlined in the legislation to kind of weigh in and make sure that we're,
Yeah.
you know, on the right track and addressing things that haven't been addressed so far, and doing that together with the new superintendent. And so,
Yep.
yeah.
I think, so let me say this, because I don't want to, just as, I guess, the person who has been taking the lead on the negotiations with for the contract with the next superintendent, and I just want to point out that Pat Mariano and Mayor Rivera are on this committee.
Yep.
On this, I don't want to comment on things like start date and those things until
Sure.
we've got the contract finalized. But let me just say that I think it is very reasonable to assume here that there's not going to be a new turnaround plan done on September 1st.
Yep.
And the superintendent will hopefully be on the job before that date. But that we as a board need to figure out that community process, work with the superintendent on that kind of time frame, and I would think it would make sense. And again, I haven't consulted with DESI specifically on this yet, and all of this is subject to the commissioner's final approval. But I think we're talking about, you know, months January-ish, I don't know. And I don't want to limit the superintendent if she says, you know what, we really need 1 year to do a school year where I can really learn this system inside out and see everything we've got and be
Right.
working on that plan. I don't know what it is, but I just say I think there is more than enough time to make sure that we have a thorough community process to get a lot of feedback about what the community wants to see in the plan for their schools.
Okay. I guess I don't disagree with that. Things are still somewhat murky to me about how this is actually going to unfold. So if you're saying that then we don't know exactly when the new superintendent's going to start, and so...
I have a good idea when the new superintendent is going to start,
but you can't say, yeah, gotcha. So do we need, like, I don't... I'm new to the public board stuff, right? So we have to deliberate about all this stuff. It's like, but do we need a subcommittee that is working on the process?
I don't want to designate it tonight when we're not more clearly thought out on this, but let me say, why don't we put it on the agenda for July?
Yeah.
Once all the members tell me they're not going to come to a July meeting, we'll put it on for August, okay?
It'd be wise to do that.
And we will, at that point, make sure Desi has weighed in fully, that we get a real sense from the members of the board, what they think would be the best piece. Hopefully, the superintendent would be here at that point.
Okay.
And we could then work quickly
on the process.
toward hammering out the process.
Right.
And then get to the real stuff.
Okay.
And Chair, if I could just make one comment, just one point of clarification. This is not the same plan that's been in place for 6 years. So turnaround plans are for 3 years, and then so the district and receiver went through a process after the termination or the end of the first plan to then create a second plan. So the plan that we're currently under is finishing 3 years of this new plan that was created.
Okay. I still think it'd be good to do it again.
And we have to.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing is, just to point out, we've made good progress, and so I think the thoughtfulness of engaging the superintendent, and letting her be something that she's really leading as one of her first major actions, I feel like is a good move. And, want to make sure that we're understanding the legal requirements, because at the end of the day, our board is, I have to understand those. But making sure that we're giving, again, the superintendent time to sketch out a timeline that is appropriate.
So I'll close this section with this point. One thing I think I can state publicly that I have been discussing with the incoming superintendent is how to merge the long-intended orientation for the LAE board with her coming on board, and how do we do a sort of joint orientation with the board and the superintendent. I think it would make sense to make that the turnaround plan a featured topic during orientation. And I know that the superintendent has some very specific thoughts, not on turnaround plan, because we haven't discussed that, but on how she would like to run the orientation from her view, and is obviously open input from others. But I think that may be a good way to make sure everybody's fully briefed on all aspects, including the legal aspects of receivership law and turnaround plans. Okay. Does anybody want any make a committee updates? I don't think there's been anything specific there that's not going to be covered. Yep, Mr. Mayor.
I just know that there's no item here about the budget. So I'd just like to do an update if you'd like.
That would be great, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So just a couple of things. One is the City Council did pass the budget we presented to them yesterday. So that takes effect July 1st. It fully funds net school spending, and because of the Senate version of the bill that's out there today, which everybody has every expectation that that's the version that's going to pass. The 2.4 that was needed by the department, the school department before was not needed. There's still more money in the city's budget for transportation and things of that nature. And I think at the end of the day, the school system is going to have all it needs to run the school system for the number of students we have. So that's all the good news. And I think there could have been 100 scenarios. Now, I think because they passed the spending plan, the budget is actually a spending plan, because revenues come in and out, and those are just projections. If our revenue projection for the Senate side does not materialize in the final budget in conference and the one that the governor signs, it's the highest number, and because it's an election year, people feel like it's going to be the one that's going to pass. No one wants to be on record cutting schools in the middle of an election year, including the governor. And not that I've spoken to him about that, but it's what folks are saying that's going to happen. But if it doesn't, the commitment from the city side, and because the city council took that vote, is to spend up to that number, and we will find a way to meet the needs of the schools in that way. Things that are just not in the net school spending or in the budget is all the borrowing we're doing for MSBA projects, for the roof and the heating system at the Arlington, the plans and designs for the new Oliver School, all that borrowing that's happening for that. Not to mention there's a bunch of capital projects in the capital improvement plan once we pass that, that will support a myriad of capital improvement projects across the city schools. So I think once we pass the capital improvement plan, we'll have a better picture of the total amount of investment, but I think everybody should be happy that we're on track, I think, as best we can, given the fiscal conditions of the city, and we're just going to continue to do that. I was going to say something that I like to say all the time, is that I think the only way this can get better is if we have a chief financial officer on the other side, working with a chief financial for the city side, and that the budget book looks exactly like the city budget book. And the budget book to date from the schools is really rolled up to major categories, and it's informative, but the book that the city council uses every year has been molded over time, and it has things like 3 years worth of data rolled up into categories that are really specific, counts of how much folks are spending from services from outside vendors to tools and equipment across the board. And it could be at the level of the school, like we have departments, but it could be a school level situation. But I think the other piece of it is it also shows trending. It shows the difference between last year and this year, and it shows what people are spending to date, but also shows all the revenues, and it's like a balance sheet how much money we have on hand, all that stuff that's I think to date just it's not been in the books as nicely and as organized as we'd like it to be. So I think that the last thing I'll say about the budget is my hope is that we will continue to at least my agenda is, and the city side is to continue to fund the schools as much as they need to make the classrooms a better place for kids to learn, and the kids are learning, and to support the turnaround plan. But we got to do that with a clear view of what the financial long-term impact is going to be for the schools, and we can't do that unless we have a professional at the highest level of the department, ensuring that is in the second. We have a book that looks just like what we have on the city side, so that everybody knows what money is on hand. That's all I have to say.
No, I appreciate that, Mr. Mayor, and just want to thank you for your leadership on the budget. Both we know you're doing that for the whole city, but also your leadership on the school budget specifically, and we appreciate it. And having attended the budget meeting last night, I can say that the councilors had a few questions relative to transportation expenses, but the council, I think, on the whole, was incredibly supportive of the school budget, and a lot of that was due to the work that you had done over the past months, and we appreciate that.
Well, they, just to follow up on that, I'll take questions if you guys want. They trust Mary Lou Bergeron too, so that's helpful. She's been before them a lot of times, but the hardest job in the Lawrence Public School System with the budget is concerned is the transportation person, because everybody thinks that they can make the transportation a lot cheaper and a lot more effective than the people who are actually doing it. And that number was up actually this year, but I think that the work that Doris Moreno did, clarifying things for people, was really clear and useful. She was
Great, and Superintendent Bergeron's team was great through the budget process. And I know because Superintendent and I were at times shuttling back and forth to your office and then the fiscal receiver, and Superintendent Bergeron's team was great, and they've always got their numbers. And I think it goes to some of the challenges in Lawrence. It's worth noting here when the question gets asked on that transportation number and it looks really high, and then you suddenly realize it's homeless families that have had no choice on where they're sheltered, and you're trying to keep families together. It's the special ed component, and it's really our most vulnerable children and families who are in that line item that looks so out of whack, but you're trying to make sure that you're doing everything you can to support those families. And it just is one of those pieces that speaks to all that the people who run the school system are trying to make sure gets done every day and done the right way. So we really appreciate your leadership on that. Ms. Anders?
So can I request that, I feel like it would be helpful also for this board, in addition to looking at the operating budget, and I completely agree with the mayor's remarks around alignment especially, that we also take a look at the facilities side of the question, because that's funded separately and differently, and I think we have some major outstanding questions that we need to resolve, because our population is growing, our school population is growing, we don't have enough schools right now to adequately house them, but adding more facilities or enlarging facilities is a expensive undertaking with operational implications as well, and so I do think that's something that we're going to need to dig into somewhat, and I think we need to have some information about that.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, just I have an outstanding request that we've been going back and forth with the department, trying to get down to specifically what I've been asking for, and I think we're getting close on it. We've been working, a lot of stuff, but the end result should be a facilities needs across the district. What's the high-end things we need to get to, the emergency stuff. I mean, we've been very blessed that MSBA has been stepping up to it, and that we have had a lot of support from the city council on the borrowing, but it's not, the picture's not clear, except to say that we know we have stuff that we have to take care of and long-term, but I don't know, we can, once I get it, we can present it to the body as well, but there's a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah, and the other thing I just want to say about that is I feel like there's like two perspectives we need to look at it from. There's a financial perspective, but there's also a geographic perspective, and this issue has come up in some past meetings in terms of housing units that are getting built and added to the city, which we desperately need, but might be disproportionately impacting certain schools or neighborhoods of the city. And so we need to look at where schools are needed, as well as how many or what, and how we're going to plan for and fund that. So I just think we need to look at that too. 100%.
So I'm just going to say that that's a very particular issue that needs to be explored. I totally agree with you on that. I just want to make a point on a more general piece, which is the budget, and just say that LAE was created midstream on this budget cycle. In fact, not even midstream, late stream, okay? Right. But now we're basically at the beginning of the next budget cycle. As the next superintendent comes in and LAE is now up and running, we need to have a discussion about what we want the budget process to look like from our side. Because we didn't have to do it this time, but we're gonna have to vote on it for this next one. And so I don't think we're ready tonight to make a decision about what it looks like, but no, and I'm not saying you're advocating that, but I'm just saying that I think, just want to be very clear, like, this board decides what that process is going to look like from the school side. And so we should be ready to have that discussion when the new superintendent starts. We should be thinking about it before and work that out. Ms. Mariano?
Yes, just quickly, I want to publicly thank the mayor for his support of the schools through the budget process. You know, past administrations haven't been very supportive of the school department, and it's really comforting to know that our mayor really put his best foot forward and advocated for the schools, and I want to thank him on behalf of the children. So thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Pat. I appreciate that. And I think I probably won't be chiming in a lot when it comes to the philosophical differences in education inside in the classroom and all that stuff. I think there's plenty of people here, but I think the only way that we get to have robust conversations about quality education in the classroom is if there's no worries about the checkbook. And so that's where I'll always be talking about and making sure so that as long as we get to where we need to be with the transparency and working hard, we can continue to fund the schools to the amount that we can afford, and even press folks to give a little bit more going forward.
I was not aware that there were philosophical debates about what goes on in the classroom. But,
I'm shocked to hear.
Can I make a small and totally unrelated request?
Yeah, this is the board member remarks / committee update section. So this is,
okay.
Please go to it.
So just next meeting, can we angle the tables slightly? Because I can only see the mayor and the chair. I have no idea what Noemi or Pat or Ventura are thinking from their facial expressions. I'd love to be able to be talking to everybody on this. So if we could arrange it more horse showy,
drop these two back, and
that would be lovely. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other board member remarks or committee updates? Great. I'm going to give a very brief superintendent contract update. The members of that subcommittee will have a draft contract any moment now. I have engaged in multiple discussions with the next superintendent on this. I feel that we are in a good place, but I don't want to get into any details at this time. The hope is that at the July meeting, we will vote to approve that contract. And
so now we're having a July meeting?
Well, so I was going to say, to just end, when you tell me that you're not going to show up for the July meeting, we will then convene some sort of special meeting to approve that contract. But I think that will, I think that is proceeding on a good path. Okay. LAE Memorandum of Understanding with DESE. Everybody should have a draft of that. That's in their binders. It's right up front in your binders. So right there. So you'll see it's should be clipped in the 3 rings right up front. So we have a subcommittee on this, and Jess Anders and I engaged in discussions with LAE Council, who has been in discussions with DESE. This basically spells out delineation of powers between DESE and LAE as receiver. My hope is to, and again, with all conditions on this, but my hope is to have us vote on a final version of this in the July meeting. There have been some changes made to the original draft. I will just say what we've done in our conversation so far is we've done a comparison of this against other agreements with other receiverships or similar. found that it pretty much parallels what's been done with all the other receivership contracts. I would just point out within this that the way this should structured, and if you look in section 4, it's pretty broad. You're not going to find a ton of detail here, but effectively, this is an agreement that we need to put into place, spelling out the parameters of the receivership. But just under the receivership law, the commissioner always has a blanket power, ability to change any of the terms here. I just want us to understand, because there were questions from the board at the last meeting and a desire to discuss this, that's what it is. And I think one of the ways LAE legal counsel has described it to me is like if your powers are on a sort of 1 to 10 scale, it's up to the commissioner whether he gives the receiver a 1 or a 10. But at any time, that can be modulated. So we could enter into an agreement, approve an agreement that has us at 10, but it is the commissioner's, at the commissioner's discretion to change that to a 5 or a 4 at any time. That's the best way I can describe it. So I just want to make that clear, because ultimately that is the sort of key piece. And I also want to just say that before you give me 96 things to take back to DESI in the negotiation.
I guess just so I'm clear about that, Mr. Chair, that ability to go from 10 to 5, is it at any given point after we sign the MOU?
Yep.
Okay.
Under the receivership law. Now, let me just say, so one, I just want to say that Dr. Rodriguez is recusing himself on this vote, and he's the person who actually is the most knowledgeable on all these turnaround things, but I don't want to put him in a bad bind on asking him about this, these pieces. But let me just say, it is my strong sense that DESI wants an empowered receiver, much as was the case for the prior 6 years. DESI does not have an interest in micromanaging the receivership. So I think they want it closer to that 10 end, and they're not looking, but I'm just trying to be abundantly clear so everybody understands when we enter into this, that the law, basically, this agreement is binding, but always subject to a change by the commissioner.
And are we looking to vote on this evening, Mr. Chair?
Nope, I wanted to put it out here tonight, get thoughts on any of those pieces, get questions, and then put it up for vote next time.
I mean, at first glance, it looks like we're being bestowed the powers of a normal school board. And given the balance of the folks on this board that are Lawrence residents and of who have Lawrence-leaning tendencies, best as I could describe it, I think this is as close to local control we can get, with knowing that we have the sword of Damocles, which is the commissioner at any point can chime in. And what I would suggest is that if we adopt what's currently there, in my short brief scanning of this, that, given the outcomes on how we evaluate the superintendent and the budgets and all those matters, and the meeting the expectations on the turnaround plan, that this is I don't see how a commissioner who runs 351 cities and towns, schools, could be involved in this so day to day. And the only time I think that the commissioner's head or DESI's head could be popped up on this if we end up in the front page of the paper because we did something stupid. And stupid's the only technical term I have for the matter. So, so I'm actually really excited about the memorandum.
Yep.
And given that this is such a public process, I just don't think DESI would be in a tough situation to publicly disagree with a board that they publicly picked. Not that we're gonna make them that, give them that opportunity, I think there's a lot of leverage here for us to do good by the district.
Yep.
With voices from the district.
So let me just say two pieces on that. So number one is, I would just say, and I think you're all already there, but it's section 4 that you really want to read. You want to read the whole agreement, but it's section 4 that's got the powers, okay? To the mayor's point. But second thing, I just want to state clearly, like, this is the version DESI gave us. It's pretty close to a 10. And it mirrors what's been done in all the other receiverships. So again, I take this all as signs from DESI. I just wanted to make sure it's on the record exactly how that law is set up. But every indication from DESI has been that they want an empowered receiver, as they had for the prior 6 years. And the draft they gave us, like Jess and I talked with the attorney. I then had a comparison run on the other receivership agreements out there, and I mean, there was really only minimal, very technical and not intentional stuff that could be subject to changes. So I think it's strong, and I just state for the record then on, again, on section 4, there's stuff relative to the turnaround plan up front that says LAE shall be responsible for the implementation of the turnaround plan, the search for the superintendent. But then I just note within that, the evaluation of the superintendent, ability to dismiss, select a successor, responsibility to review and approve the budget, among others. But those seem to me, as you said, Mr. Mayor, pretty in line with what a school committee's delegate. Any questions or comments on this from anyone?
I do want to say, I just want to make sure, I'm assuming we all agree to this, and I agree, I think it's fine, and you guys have laid it out exactly right. We just need to pay attention to the parts of this that are going to require substantive agenda items at future meetings. For instance, it's our power and responsibility to evaluate the superintendent. So, 6 months from now, we need to put on the agenda some process around that so that we're clear about how we're going to do that and, when we're going to do that and so on. So I just want to make that operational connection for us between the powers that we have and then the things that are going to need to, we're going to need to work on the details of what's happening.
Yep. Point well taken. So, look, I've introduced it in this manner, which is incredibly uncomfortable in one manner, in one way, to be in compliance with the open meeting law. You now have a copy of this agreement. You can review this before our next meeting. If you have questions or concerns on it, I would direct them to our legal counsel, and you can do it to me specifically to stay within compliance of the open meeting law. But I've introduced it here and put it up for discussion so that we are in compliance. You all have it, and it will come up for a vote next time that we convene. Great. Okay, number 10. This is another agreement that is in negotiation currently, and that is a joint meeting agreement between the Lawrence School Committee and the Lawrence Alliance for Education. I'm not going to circulate a draft on that tonight because I think it's just fair to say that that it is still in a state of negotiation where I want to hold a copy back. But my hope is that we will vote on an agreement for this, and it is my strong hope to vote on an agreement on this in at our next meeting. So I have had multiple meetings with members of the school committee relative to this. 2 of those meetings Jess Andrews has been part of, but I've had a lot more than 2 meetings relative to this. And I will just say where this started was when I was appointed chair, as I sat down with many of you and other stakeholders in the community. One refrain that was repeated to me many times by the mayor, by Jess Sanders, by members of the city council, by other leaders in Lawrence, was there has to be a level of engagement and dialogue with the current school committee. We all recognize that LAE is the receiver, that LAE is the empowered body, but if there is a real sense, and there needs to be, of the move back to local control eventually, whatever time frame that is, there's got to be real dialogue, bare minimum, with the school committee. So I began a series of conversations with different school committee members, in particular the vice chair, and what we are talking about and negotiating, and what I would ask for input on tonight, is a joint meeting agreement. And I will just cover some parts of it and look to get your feedback. So the desire would be for these joint meetings to be roughly 4 in a year. I want to be really clear, like, nothing contravenes the power of the individual bodies. So there's not going to be votes taken as a collective or anything like that. The LAE power remains power under the LAE, the school committee power remains the power under the school committee. So it would actually technically be 2 meetings at the same time held jointly, just to be in compliance with open meeting. But it's not going to be sort of a 14-member body voting on things. That's like, I'd just be really clear, that's not the case, and we could not do that legally, and I don't think there's a desire, quite frankly, by either body to do that. But there is a desire to have roughly 4 meetings a year, that the topic of these meetings would be specifically the district turnaround plan, which we began to discuss earlier, and the transition. And let me state really clearly, and Jess can testify to this fact as well. I always state very clearly that the LAE has no power or say over when the transition ultimately happens. And the school committee members understand that very clearly. Talented group of individuals, they're very clear on that. But a discussion about transition is something that is desired. And so they would like the subject area to be the turnaround plan and the transition as discussion areas. One of the places that I went initially was, do you want to just have 4 meetings and we kind of set an agenda on whatever specific issues are the issues of the day on the schools, whether it's school safety or budget or whatever it is? I think the answer was, it surprised me, I had presumed that's where we go, was very specifically, no, we don't want that. What we want are meetings relative to the turnaround plan and the transition. So I want to throw that open as the first piece here for discussion and trying to reach an agreement, board member feelings relative to joint meetings with the school committee, which would be focused on turnaround plan and transition. From, again, perspective where it's really discussion.
Mr. Chair, so just a couple of things. We get beat up pretty heavily about process. And so I just want to do something that's kind of been on my mind, and I just want to make sure that it's clear about it. As the chair of the school committee, and not having been part of those discussions, I feel like there was a step missed. I'm not sure there's consensus on the school board about what the role should be at these joint meetings, the number of those joint meetings. I know people have taken liberties to suggest, community-wide sentiments about the receivership and the turnaround, stuff that I challenge all the time, and stuff that I ask for proof of all the time, and oftentimes is not forthcoming. And so I would just, as a board, just inherently, it makes sense for us to be talking about turnaround. I like that subject matter. I think that's an important piece to talk about. But, it's, and I know I've talked about the number. I said, maybe quarterly sounds like a good idea. But I just want to be careful about that there's a consensus on the board about any of this stuff. And considering that we have it in an open meeting, had those discussions. I think sometimes people take liberties, and then, sometimes folks forget that there are a lot of popularly elected members of the school board.
Yep.
And I'm going to bring this up at the school board meeting because it's just, it brings this thing like there's a division inside the school board where there really isn't. It brings this concept, this understanding that there's certain people can talk for the full board and certain people can't. And as a chair, I find that that's absolutely not the case. We have a chair, and we should have more consensus. So I want to apologize because you guys are spending a lot of time having this discussion, but I just want to put it out there. We get beat up about process all the time. And as a chair, I think the school board members have been missing process. It's not welcome, at least not by this member. But as far as the subject matter, I would have, if you would have said, hey, we're going to have these big discussions about, what should be in the budget, or these big discussions about whatever the minutia of running the school board, I would have been not supportive of that because no school board has that. The superintendent under ed reform is actually a lot more powerful than the school board is on those matters. At the end of the day, really the big thing that the school board has to kind of wave as a hammer is the review of the superintendent. So I don't want to set up an expectation that when we get to the other side of the rainbow, which we hope to get to soon, that there's actually more powers that the school board has that it really doesn't have, because that wouldn't be helpful either. So I'm glad that the subject matter is tight. And hopefully the meetings will follow kind of the similar formats that we have here with public participation and all those things. But I just don't want to spend, I don't want this board to spend that much time getting into something where I feel like there's no consensus on the other side, and then we're going to go back and kind of hammer out what we want on the other side. That's all I just want to say. Thanks.
Other feedback? Ms. Anderson? Yep.
I can wait if there are other comments. Yeah.
Ms. Mariano?
Yes, I like what you've suggested, and I think it's important that we are inclusive with the school committee. And I think the question is, are we getting ourselves ready for the district to go back to local control? So to include the school board in the formation of the turnaround plan, which ultimately has that purpose leading us to that transition back, and the transition plan, I think is a very good place to start with the school board. I agree with the mayor. If it gets beyond that, then I think we're wasting our time. But these are the two concrete things I think we hear from the community when we're out and about. When is the district going to come back to local control? So I like the idea of being inclusive with the school committee. I think that's important.
Thank you. Ms. Anderson?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think, this is my first public board, and so I'm getting an education in open meeting law, and I think one of the interesting ironies of it is that there's certain things that can't be discussed by more than 2 or 3 members of the board before they come to, right? So I think and as John said, I've been in 2 of these meetings with him and with the interested members of the school committee, because I think that we all are interested in, right, a successful turnaround plan and an eventual transition back to local control. And so the question has been, how do we really operationalize that and make that happen? And I think the understanding has been coming from those meetings that the people who have been in those meetings are then going to do what John has just done and brought it back to their full group for discussion. And so I'm assuming that the school committee members who have participated in that, I'm not just assuming, but they've explicitly said that that's in their plan of action to do as well, and so that it can be publicly and fully discussed by both bodies, because I don't think we wouldn't enter into any kind of joint agreement without the consent of both of the individual bodies.
Yeah, it's just that I think when we want a group of folks from this board to talk, we send them out and task them such. And we have not done that from the board, from the school board. Okay,
No, this is a, listen, this is
so we're clear about
a,
this, we get bit up
Yeah,
on
yeah.
the process all the time.
yeah, this is, listen, this is a point well taken, Mr. Mayor, and I just want to say, like, you know, public bodies don't ever want to look like anybody is having any disagreement, and we all understand why. But the open meeting law demands that we do things a certain way. I think you're making an excellent point here. I'm not disagreeing with your point at all. What I'm just trying to say is, I don't mind if we have a meeting right now and we're pointing out sort of pieces where that leave people feeling a little bit sort of like, why haven't I been staked in, or why haven't I been staked in? That's how we're going to hammer this out. Open meeting law demands we do it in public. So I'm totally good with it. I take your point. It sounds like in the next school committee meeting, there's got to be a discussion about this so that members understand, have a clear understanding of what's being negotiated and are able to give input through this. And this is actually how I'm getting really helpful input before we get to a stage where we're going to vote or sign anything. And so your point is really well taken on that. And if I understood you correctly, because I don't want to put words in your mouth, you are good with the subject area being turnaround and transition.
Yes, and the last thing I'll say about it is that I bring it up as an issue, but it's not, I'm not taking issue with it.
Yep.
And so I'm sure we're going to be fine. I think the agreement is great.
Yeah, no, and the point is well taken. And I will just say that the school committee members who have had the discussion with, I just want to give them due credit. They never presume to speak for the whole body.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And I think they're very clear about that. They never presume to speak for the whole body. It's noted frequently by them that there's 2 school committee members on this board, and that you know, ultimately, to do this agreement, we want a majority vote of the LAE board and a majority vote of the school committee on what the agreement looks like. So if I can, is there anyone else who wants to comment on turnaround or transition as a subject area? I want to state, you know, 1 million times here, so my cell phone doesn't blow up, that this is not going to be 2 bodies merging as one and taking binding votes. This is discussion. Okay, so.
Chair, if I could just say a quick comment.
Dr. Rodriguez.
So the goal of collaboration with the school committee from this board, I think, is the right one, and I would expect nothing different, given the leadership of our chair, who I think has demonstrated for, you know, throughout the last few months, like a real desire to engage with multiple stakeholders, including the school committee. So I think it's the right direction. I guess I would love as a board to be able to make sure, you know, that we're getting to a level of detail, even with those 2 topics of turnaround plan and transition. And for example, with the turnaround plan, the previous discussion talking about the duties and responsibilities of this board, for example, with the commissioner, this is the board that's responsible for creating the turnaround plan and implementing it. And just that we're thinking through a lot of the details of, you know, sort of the engagement that's happening with multiple stakeholders, including the school committee, but also recognizing that this board has an obligation and legal responsibility that we're taking into account as we're designing the engagement. Similarly, with the transition, the chair stated it that at the end of the day, it's the commissioner who's going to decide this. And so I just want to make sure that when we're, you know, in my understanding of the goal is that we're working with the school committee to think about just how they're setting themselves up, you know, eventually to be able to, once the commissioner makes a decision around transition. But I guess I just want to be very careful in terms of how we're framing both the outcomes and the specific topics to account for this board's responsibilities, and again, just making sure that we're not, you know, inadvertently communicating, I think, any, or setting up any expectations that are not within the parameters of this board. And I want to underscore, again, as I started, I think the spirit of collaboration that's being not only talked about today in this topic, but I've seen under the leadership of the chair, demonstrated in trying to engage and trying to, I think that's the right direction for us to head into.
I do have a comment too, and is that I do agree with everybody that it is important that we engage with the school committee as we move forward in the future for the, public schools. But for us, I think that we need to have a better understanding from DESI, what is the process of turnaround, like even in the details, like how does the application look like, how many people are involved and so forth, even if we're not the one directly doing it, because even though we're right now on the last year of this turnaround process, in other schools where you have to go through the other district where you have to go through that, by now they will already have had a plan to work on that for a year before they do the proposal. We don't even have the superintendent. So, it takes, 2 months just to find the bathroom. So, and we do want to make sure that that is a detailed process. We need to know what are our legal responsibilities. So then when we have this conversation with the school committee, we don't give them the wrong impression that, we're doing certain things because we want to do it that way. It's just that legally we're bound to certain things. But at the same time, eventually, the schools will go back to the local control. So one of the things that I was thinking is it is good that the school committee is engaged and familiar with all the different things that are happening, because eventually when we pass the baton to them, it's a smooth transition.
Point well taken. Other comments on subject area? Okay.
So, I'm sorry,
Yep.
Ron, so do you think we'll have a draft of the agreement to present at the next meeting?
Yep.
For everyone to
I think
look at the
that's
specifics
I think that's the
of it?
logical next place
Yeah.
to go. Yep.
Great, okay, thank you.
So other pieces I just want to get guidance on. The meetings would rotate chairs of the bodies, and who chairs it?
See, that's one thing I might disagree with. You could chair all of them if you want. I'm joking, that sounds weird.
Great. So I would include an expiration date of basically the end of the school year, with provisions around the ability to renew the agreement if both bodies agree to renew it, but to actually have a finite date that this is a trial run.
Mm-hmm.
People have comments on that, or?
That's fine, yeah.
Okay.
I just want to say, I also think that's important, because as school committee's an elected body that can possibly change every 2 years, I think it's important to have those built-in annual opportunities for
Sure.
re-engagement, whatever new members happen to be.
There's been discussion about subcommittees, but ultimately, I think what the discussion went to is the fact that both bodies have the ability to appoint subcommittees through their own rules and their own manner, and so that subcommittees would not be appointed during these meetings, but that members could make recommendations to their respective chairs as requests for subcommittees that would then have to get taken up at their own separate individual meetings.
What would be the role of those subcommittees?
I don't know if a discussion came up on some aspect of the turnaround plan and they want, if people felt that there should be separate discussions on this aspect, would you have a subcommittee the way we appoint one? Again, the notion though would be that you could not designate a subcommittee at one of these meetings. You could only take a recommendation for one, and it has to be within the separate body. I think that presents
Too many meetings.
maybe some technical issues for Ms. Mariano and Mayor Rivera serving on both, but this has been discussed. So I don't
So
know
was
if there
the matter
that's-
was that we wouldn't have subcommittees, but or that we would?
I think the idea is just that if there was a feeling that there was a topic that required special attention, where do you go from there? I think the feeling was, look, we're not going to have joint subcommittees that mix the two bodies. There's no real statutory authority around that. So if somebody felt like there needed to be a subcommittee, they could make a request or a recommendation to the respective chair at that meeting, but that then gets taken up
At their own.
at their own body's meeting.
Right. So the idea would be if there's a substantive issue that comes up relative to one of the core topics for discussion at each of those meetings, and we clearly need more discussion around it, that LAE could appoint subcommittee members and school committee could appoint subcommittee members, and they could possibly work jointly towards things, but they would have to be appointed by their respective bodies and then bring things back to their respective bodies for further deliberation.
But that would be only for them, or do we have to have a subcommittee here too? Because then that would be,
Up to each body.
Yeah. Right.
So you could have, one body could decide they want to have a subcommittee.
well, why, I mean, since we are meeting jointly, instead of having another subcommittee, which it will imply having another meeting between the group and another meeting between our groups, then that could be, I mean, bring those issues to this meeting here. Because we have, I mean, there's space for people to make comments, so we can be added to the agenda. So that way it's more open and everybody can have an opinion about it. And even people that are in the subcommittees that are not, the people that are not in the subcommittee that also might have an opinion about it will have an open forum to also have those discussions. I mean, I guess that's.
I don't intend to, I would, let me just say this, I would defer to the will of this body relative to subcommittees for LAE, because I don't want to overburden people with a ton of meetings, but I also want to respect the notion that there may be issues that arise that people feel like requires more attention.
Would that be ad hoc then? Could it be? Because, I mean, my concern, and I'm, new to the board, and I'm learning, about the different stakeholders, is that I want to make sure that we know all the things that we need to do, and we do them right before we start to add other meetings. Right now, it's very murky, the division between, or the perceived division between us and the school committee. So even those areas, and even the legality of our responsibilities and how they perceive us, all that has to take in place. So until that gets resolved, I could see us having a lot of these ad hoc meetings because people are trying to figure out even the issue of when the turnaround will happen, which we know that it doesn't depend on us, depend on the commissioner. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it. I'm saying that we should play it by ear, I guess, ad hoc.
I appreciate the feedback.
And being the eternal optimist, I'm just not sure where we might get to a point where we disagree or need extra work that might need to be off table, you know what I'm saying? So I love to manage expectations, and a lot of people don't like that about me, and the reality is that that's a lot of work. So yeah, I don't have a problem with it. I just may not be volunteering for subcommittees.
Yeah, I think the intent of it was just to be able to give us the ability to have deeper discussions on particularly thorny issues and not, I mean, none of us at this table would say that we need more meetings in our life, right? But I think that it was just to be able to do justice to issues that might arise, and that, if we did, then it was to be able to continue in that spirit of collaboration while retaining this separateness and autonomy of each individual body, but allowing for some, continued joint discussion if needed. I don't think we should assume that it's going to happen, but it was just if needed.
Ms. Mariano?
No, I'm set.
Good.
Thank you.
I think that is all I have relative to sort of, content areas on this. Anybody else want to make any other comments relative to these possibilities?
This is a clarifying question.
Yep.
With the two topics that were laid out, one was a turnaround plan, one was a transition. With the turnaround plan, what was the focus or initial focus? Is it like progress to date quarterly on the
Yeah.
turnaround plan? Is that it?
Yeah, sorry, I should have stated that. So it would be keyed to the quarterly reports on the transition plan. That's where the sort of 4 meetings comes from. So it would be to review the reports that get filed.
I believe in, Ventura, can you correct me if I'm wrong on this, but under receivership law, those reports have to be made to school committee quarterly anyway, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so this would better institutionalize that and give us an opportunity to talk together instead of separating that process out.
I'm glad you said that, because I think we get them. And so I don't know if we would like do it twice. So I think, yeah, I mean, if we do those the same nights,
It's more efficient.
yeah, just get them both done.
And again, minor point of clarification, but I think it's to the point of making sure we understand, all the intricacies. The law is actually that the receiver provides a school committee with a written report. So there is no requirement of presentation. I think it's been past practice of the receiver in this district to meet with the school committee. I think even monthly, I think has been but in terms of the law, just to be clear, it's that a report is submitted. But what I'm hearing here is that it would be potentially some joint reporting out of the progress that kind of is aligned to the timing of those quarterly reports.
John?
Yep.
Ventura is absolutely right. The superintendent did meet with us on a monthly basis and gave us an update on as far as the school system goes. And we did periodically receive written reports, too, that were sent to us. So that did happen.
Yep. So I don't know what the manner is. I think this again goes to the sort of unexplored territory of a receiver that is a board. Okay? Because that raises issues that are sort of across the board in this unexplored, and pardon the double use of the word there, but this is unexplored territory on having a receiver that is a board. I would like to remind everyone. And so I think the idea here began as sort of the reports get filed. It's not sort of a joint reporting out, but the reports get filed and then the two bodies come together to discuss the report. That was filed. That is how it is conceived of. I can see where there is a hiccup there relative to having a receiver board now, because technically then we would be filing those reports to the school committee, right? So that raises issues, although I would say this presents the opportunity to sort of consolidate actually meetings, a meeting in which we would report out, and then a separate meeting the school committee has, which could potentially be rolled in or not. But the idea here was to have a discussion about the progress reports.
But wouldn't it be better, to submit the report, they have a time to see it, and then have the discussion?
Yes, so.
Because otherwise, at the meeting, just become reporting.
No, exactly, right. So the idea would be, and again, just some of the specifics that John and I had talked about is that the report would be submitted to school committee, and the quarterly joint meeting would be scheduled for, say, 2 to 3 weeks after that, so that the school committee would have time to review that report, and then we jointly discuss it. But I would also say that pursuant to the powers and responsibilities outlined in the DESI memo that we just discussed, we have the ability to delegate certain duties and responsibilities to the superintendent. And I would say that, and I welcome any disagreement with that, but I personally feel that it is beyond the scope of this board to be able to adequately report on the progress around the turnaround plan when we are not the staff of LPS implementing it and living it and doing it. So the way that it's, I think, realistically going to have to go down in my mind is that it's the superintendent that we're going to have to make responsible for that. She's going to work with her staff to get a report to us that we can submit to school committee as well, and then we're going to jointly discuss it together, which is a more efficient mode of doing this than having us discuss it as a board and having LPS staff here to perhaps respond to things or discuss it with us, and then them having to do the exact same thing for school committee. So I just think that this would be a better way to implement that.
Yes, I agree with you. I just want to, talk about one of the steps. So, I mean, you're right. I mean, we're not in the position of being the one, going through the details of the report. But the report, she will share the report after we approve the report, correct? Is that what you were saying?
I guess I don't have a
because
particular answer for
otherwise
that.
then
Maybe John?
I mean, because it's our responsibility to approve the.
Yeah, I mean, let's
Okay.
look at the budget as a parallel, okay? Like, the board does not prepare the budget. The school department prepares the budget. The school department presents the budget to the board approves. Ideally.
Right.
I think we're talking about something similar when it comes to both the drafting of the next turnaround plan, although obviously, like, community input becomes really important in all of this, and preparation of reports around the turnaround plan, the existing one and the new one, once it gets enacted. It's the school department that has the day-to-day handle on all of this. It's coming before the LAE board for review. We do have to do formal approval, and it would seem to me, just working this through with you right now, that I think you're right, Dr. Custodio-Laura, like, we would have to approve, and then it would be appropriate for discussion,
Sure.
okay? Which does not put us in the ability to consolidate meetings, but does sound right process-wise. Other than that, we're having 12 meetings, and I think we could look and say that 4 of them could become potentially joint.
Right.
So there's a consolidation there, but you're not going to be able to roll in the approval of a progress report and the actual giving of that report to the school committee as a joint thing.
Well, just as a process suggestion, we could have the reports presented to us all at the same meeting, and then the board, I think that might actually be a useful process. And then us at a different meeting, after having heard the concerns of the school board and our concerns, vote on the progress and the reports after that.
Right. I feel like that would be fine.
And so that the superintendent is saying, here, this is what we got, and everybody does their dance, we got the PowerPoints, everybody gets, then we got all these questions, boom, 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 and then 2 weeks later, everybody comes back and say, what we reviewed on last time in this board meeting, separate and apart from the other board meeting, you can have it say. I'm skeptical, so I'm surprised I came up with that idea, but I think it's actually, it's me for thoughtful. And I say I'm skeptical because, not many people don't take this as a task that they have on their everyday conversations about this, but the way that people look at our community, to me, is really important. And so all I see is the venues in which these conversations because there's going to be a lot of tough conversations about turnaround, and there's going to be a lot of tough conversations about handoff. And the opportunities for us to look like a clown car they just multiply. And even though it's just like normal people having disagreements, I don't want to give DESI, the commissioner, and the powers that be up on Beacon Hill any more fodder for why they should keep control from the city from us. And so I worry greatly about the depth and breadth of these conversations and the amount of interaction folks want. You know, I just worry about it. But having said that, I think that if the superintendent is the one delivering the information, we're all receiving it and having some back and forth. I think that lessens that, because at the end of the day, we do have a responsibility that the board doesn't have it, is accepting the report and then ensuring that because the part isn't going to be the information, the part is going to be the adjustment of the actions, right? So the school board's going to want to say, you should go in X direction. I think because most people are going to be of the same mindset, 95% of the time, we're all going to want to make the adjustments in the same direction.
Yeah.
But in those one or two occasions where we don't want to make the same adjustments, you know, the boards vote differently on a matter, at least we have another board meeting in which we say, okay, listen, after all the input, this is where we're going to land. And it might be different from what we did in the joint meeting.
So I think those are really important comments. And I would just say to them, one, that's part of why there's a finite date on these. It's 4 meetings, trial run, to see if it's they're productive sessions or not. But I would also say in that I think there's also the potential for great things to happen with these meetings. And I take your point, Mr. Mayor. I don't think there's no way we're not going to have disagreement in those meetings. But my experience chairing an education committee prior was that when you got things out in the open, in the public forum, there would be a lot of disagreement, and there'd be arguing and some things like that some people may construe as a circus sideshow, but that it always made everybody more accountable. And as the process developed, it staked more people in terms of getting the opinions and the voices out there, and was ultimately more productive than when it wasn't done that way. That's my hope. That's my hope. And it could absolutely not turn out that way. But I'll just say, like, coming on the superintendent search, there's a toxicity in the air because of just that feeling of not having control over your own schools. And that I've noted that toxicity has nothing to do with whether LPS has done well or not over the past 6 years. Like, LPS has done really well. Jeff Riley was a great superintendent, and LPS has done really well. But nothing ever changes the fact that you wake up in your community and you don't have control over your own schools. That's still going to be something that haunts and eats away and creates a toxicity. And so that's why I'm hopeful that these meetings, they may not be pleasant, there might be disagreements at times, but I think it can be productive in helping to address some of that toxicity over the road back to transition, however long that may be. That's just that's just where I come from at this, and as you know, Mr. Mayor, I got people in my ear every day on all corners telling me, don't do this, don't do that, you're crazy, you're crazy, you're crazy, you're gonna get beat up, you're gonna get beat up. The one thing that works to my benefit is that those who love and care about me the most do not wake up and read the Eagle Tribune in the morning. And so I'm good to take the risk on trying to see if we can make this productive.
John, the other thing is that if those additional meetings have a very precise agenda, that will also help to keeping things focused. And even when people get in disagreement and so forth, we can always bring back people to those points. But to your point, I think that we need probably to be careful about how many of those meetings should be. Not that the meeting should not happen, but in the case that will happen, what would be considered reasonable to happen, those ad hoc meetings? Is it going to be only 2, or is it going to be 20? So we probably, as part of this process, we should figure out what the number of those meetings will be. And then, because the other thing is, like, sometimes people just want to be heard.
Yep.
And sometimes they just, they need validation about how passionate they feel about education. And, we need to provide that outlet too. But at the same time, there is a balance of how many of those meetings are considered reasonable.
Yep. So I think that point's really well taken. I think what we're looking at here is we're talking about 4 joint meetings.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to sort of see where the notion of subcommittees kind of goes, but that may be something that's more appropriate for a discussion around renewal of this agreement than the first run, or just to see where that goes. But I think what we can say is the 4 joint meetings and not try to put too much on people's plates. I should also just say in the draft notions and discussions was that the agenda would be set by the chairs of the respective committees a week before the meeting. Again, and it has to fall under turnaround and transition.
So can I just say, I mean, some of you have heard me say this, I'm never a fan of acting from fear, and I feel like everyone I know on this board and on the school committee is an intelligent, rational human being with the best interests of the schools and children of Lawrence at heart, and I feel a lot of optimism about our ability to have productive joint meetings on things, and I feel like we have to have faith in democracy and democratic participation and deliberation, and I think there will be conflict and there will be disagreement, but I would be severely disappointed in DESE if they took any sign of disagreement as anything but a healthy expression of democratic deliberation in a city that cares deeply about its children and its educational system. And that's where I think the spirit of this joint agreement is coming from, and where I think we can get to on that. So I just want to say that.
So I'm glad you said that after he said what he said, because I think besides Pat Mariano, I'm probably the only one that's been at this table and at that table and in the throes of what caused us to get receivership taken away from us, and in conversations with people who were trying to get them to give us control back. Yeah. So I know the sensitivities across the board, and so I'm just always going to be the person making sure we know what's at stake and what could be considered sensible disagreement on our part may be misconstrued as not sensible disagreement in other parts. I didn't just bring that up because I'm afraid of it. It's because I know that that's exactly what happens. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt that a discussion here about whether or not one marker for turnaround is an important marker for turnaround, and that should be in the plan, can be a sense that we don't want to enforce rigor. Mm. And so that's just yet another sign for why we're not ready to take control back of our community. And so I as a person who makes a living off small d democracy, I've told expectation that democracy at the end of the day will have a good result. That's not what this is. This is a conversation about 2 boards, and I just want to be clear when we have those discussions that we got to be careful about those discussions. Expectations are set around those discussions, because after the meetings, people talk to reporters, and those reports get put in the local paper, and those get picked up by statewide papers, and then other people are engaged in this. I'm concerned about it. I hope that you guys I hope that the result is different than my concern.
Okay, no, point well taken. I guess I feel like it is. I feel like it's absolutely a risk worth taking, and I feel like we could also have this conversation with school committee members, and we can all be careful and disciplined in how we're expressing ourselves and what we're saying.
Any other comments? Okay, this video should be the textbook on the open meeting law. and then people can decide good or bad. But I appreciate the discussion, and I appreciate the differing opinions. And it also serves really well in negotiating the agreement and bringing it back to this board, and I think the school committee members will feel the same about bringing it back to the school committee. To just have had this discussion right now publicly is a big help. Okay, so with that covered, I will be in touch relative to the timing of the next meeting. We are going to have to approve a few items, in particular the superintendent's contract and hopefully this joint meeting agreement. And the DESI memo too, yes. Sooner rather than later. But I will be in touch about how we might do that in a way that is least burdensome to people as the school year ends. I also don't want to, I want to be very respectful of LPS and staff as the school year ends about not overburdening them in their, short break. Because we know school's right back before you know it in mid-August. Anybody want any final remarks or comments or anything? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.